This episode is powered by Go High Level, the all-in-one platform we use to automate ASQ empowerment. Funnels, email, SMS, calendars. It's how we stay aligned and focused. If you're a conscious entrepreneur ready to scale, scan the QR code or click our link in the show notes. Welcome to the ASQ Podcast, where midlife transitions become your greatest teachers. Have you ever felt like giving your power away has become your default setting? What if your next evolution comes from reclaiming that power, not through force, but with soul? Today, we welcome internationally renowned speaker and transformation coach, Christian de la Huerta, to explore how awakening to your soulful power can radically transform your relationships, leadership, and life. Stay tuned.
Well, Christian, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, looking at some of your books and some of the things that you've done. So again, thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing really well. And thank you for having me. Been looking forward to our conversation.
No, absolutely. Pre-recording, we were talking about sharing our Latin culture. So it's also awesome to see somebody in our culture share so powerful stories. So in our interviews, we are accustomed to ask this question: where were you pitched? So tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from. Where did the universe decide to drop you in?
Well, we do share that Caribbean background. I was born in Cuba, so pitched is a good metaphor because baseball is one of the national pastimes there. So I was born actually the year of the revolution. So I lived in a communist regime for 10 years and came to the U.S. when I was 10 with my family.
And how was that transition? Because being at such a young age and seeing your family going through that, a major transition, a major political transition, a historical transition. What are your recollections of that?
Well, our parents kept us pretty protected from the fear that they lived in because they were part of the counter-revolutionary activities. A lot of their friends, were imprisoned or were killed. But I didn't know about those stories till after the fact. And for my parents, there was a dramatic difference because they had come out of a different era when Cuba was, in some ways, had a higher standard of living than the U.S. Because they had the culture of Europe and the benefits of being just 90 miles from the U.S. So we didn't know what we were missing. I remember there was a time like, what's chewing gum to us here in the state? It's nothing. We put a stick of gum in our mouth and spit it out and don't even think about it. We had it better than most because our parents had friends who worked in foreign embassies. So a couple of times a year, we used to get a box of chiclets, with the little individual ones and split them between the kids. It was very fair. And what we used to do is chew our gum. And then at the end of the day, get a glass of water, put toothpaste in it with a little bit of water, stick our gum in there so it'd be minty the next day, and hide it so my mom wouldn't throw it out. So sometimes we keep that going for a couple of weeks at a time until she found it.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. That sounds so inventive and Caribbean of us, right? To maintain that flavor.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You've been guiding people for over 30 years. I mean, you've been doing this work for a long, long time. And part of your journey began with shyness, self-doubt. Can you share about that? How was that for you? What was the catalyst to begin the exploration of shyness and self-doubt to be the man that you've become?
Well, yeah, it's a beautiful question. I was painfully shy. Like I was okay one-on-one, but if you added a third human, I clammed up. And speaking in public in front of a room, forget about that. Like I was not up for that. I just wasn't ready for that. And yet I knew I always had a sense of mission. I always had a sense of purpose. I always knew that I was here to make a difference in people's lives, and translated that in different ways. Initially, I was born in a very Catholic environment. So, one of 9 kids. Um, and so initially I thought I was going to be a priest. And then my dad was a psychiatrist, so I didn't want to go through medical school. So then I thought I was going to go, get a counseling psychology degree. And then realized that psychology, at least as it was taught then, left out a whole aspect of being human, which is the spiritual aspect. They just completely ignored it. And to me, that just didn't make any sense. I wanted to approach, and it was so important for me to approach the whole human being. And so my teachings is they are kind of a blend of psychology and spirituality, but from looking eastward, looking at some of the concepts from Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and the indigenous traditions.
Yeah.
And so in terms of like stepping out of that shyness, to answer your question, I actually took a course in public speaking. I knew I had to get over that fear, and hated it because for 14 weeks I had to get up on Thursday nights and give 3 2-minute speeches. Come Monday, I was already dreading it. But what happened, halfway through the course, having to do that week after week after week, it stopped being such a big deal. So kind of feel the fear and do it anyway.
And do it anyway.
Yeah.
There's 2 things that you mentioned that I want to touch on, sharing similar backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and growing up Catholic. There's always that religious Catholic guilt that we carry with us, particularly when you go into the realm of the psycho-spiritual, right? And blending different mythologies and Eastern traditions into what we were given as traditionally. Was there a conflict culturally within your household, being that they grew up so Catholic and we're so strong in that particular aspect, but here you're stepping out into another domain, something that is unknown? Was there any conflict when it came to that? And how was that?
Yeah, sure. It was painful for them, because they thought, they came from the belief that there was one true religion and that was one path to God, or one path to the sacred and to quote unquote salvation. So in their eyes, I was saying no to that, and add to that the whole other layer that I was gay, that I am gay. So in their worldview, that's a mortal sin. And they worked through that. It wasn't easy. And one thing that both my parents, love was always bigger than anything else. Like no matter, bigger than belief systems or religious conditioning or cultural conditioning. Our family was really, and still has really strong basis in love, and I feel very, very blessed for that.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned Eastern philosophies and Eastern traditions. There's an aspect of the heroic journey in which you go into the abyss. And culturally speaking, you mentioned being gay, having the background of Christianity, expanding and really stepping out on your own. There's always that abyss that we fall into. Can you speak a little bit about that abyss, but also what came out of that? What was the learning, the lessons? Because in every spiritual journey, you go through that. Can you speak a little bit about that, and then what came out on the other side for you?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question, because I know you do a lot of work with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and that's always resonated with me. This the 2 of the books that I've got out are part of a series called, the series is called Call for Heroes, and coming from the perspective that I think the times that we live in really require a heroic way of living, and looking at ourselves, and living consciously, and doing relationships consciously and intentionally. So yeah, part of the hero's journey is you step out into, you abandon the safety of the village, of the known, of the family unit, and you wander off into the unknown. And yeah, it's always difficult. In and finding a way, like having to create a whole new way of relating to life, to the sacred, um, was a long process and painstaking process, and required a lot of looking at myself and asking the hard questions, the existential questions of who are we and what am I doing here and what is life all about? Um, Questions that I think important and that every human being needs to ask, and probably does ask at some point, unless we're running away from them and self-medicating and distracting ourselves and trying not to feel and just to get by, which I don't think is a good strategy, because there is, as difficult as it may be and as heroic as it may be, it's incredibly rewarding. With the sense of empowerment, of freedom that is at the result of that journey of exploration is priceless, and to be able to make our own choices, about what's right, what's wrong, about what we want to do with our lives, how we want to dedicate the little time that we have here, incredibly empowering.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so you articulate it so well, because the gold, it's in the journey, and asking those tough questions and asking those existential questions, right? I think that everyone at one point or another comes in that threshold, and you were courageous enough to face it and to ask that question. What was there within you that spoke in your soul that said, I have to do this?
It was a question of survival. I think there, like we're talking about, there are existential questions for all humans. For people like me, who didn't fit the mold, who were rejected, quote unquote, by society, um, that becomes even more intense, more important. Like, what if I'm not going to go to heaven? If I'm doing, if I am being rejected by society for who I am, then who am I? What am I doing here? And what is my purpose? And so, in a way, I think having had to face those questions at an early age was a head start, right? I think it was an advantage. It was difficult. Like, my whole adolescence was one long depression, because I didn't feel I belonged anywhere. I didn't, certainly didn't belong in the religion in which I was raised, and kept all of that secret in the down low and the dark. But, having to face those struggles and face myself so early on was incredibly empowering. And that's what makes me so effective as a coach, as a retreat facilitator, as an author. Is I walk my talk. Like, everything that I talk about, I've addressed and I've dealt with and I struggled with. So this is not just pretty stuff I read in another book or learned in a weekend retreat. It's like this is lived information.
Yeah. And I could tell that you have, because you're so passionate, and it comes across, when you work in this domain, and you've walked that path, you know who is talking sincerely, and I could see it in your face that this is you. It's not a theoretical idea, right? It's not that. So, before we get into talking about conscious love, right? Our society has a lot of information out there and defines a lot of things, in many ways that seem to be almost diminished. I want to talk about consciousness from your perspective. How will you define that? How will you define consciousness? And how do you come to understand that?
Yeah, that is a great and a very profound question. And I think it's ultimately a mystery, like what consciousness is. There's definitely a level of awareness, self-awareness that comes with that. That is part of that. That is maybe an expression of that. Uh, but that intelligence, whatever that is, because there's some people who theorize that even plants are sentient, that they feel. There's theories that animals have self-awareness, some of them, like we don't know, like we don't really know. There's that consciousness, and then there's that sense of knowing who we are, that the sense of personality, the ego, the self-identity. Like, this is Christian, that's Omar. As far as we know, we're the only species that has that self-reflective consciousness, that ability to reflect upon ourselves and ask questions about who we are and what we like and what we're here and all that kind of stuff. There's some theories that the dolphins and the whales and the higher primates, maybe the elephants, have a sense of self, but we don't really know. Like, we know there's a difference between like a dog and a cat. Put them in front of a mirror, and they deal with that image as if it was another dog or cat. If you put a gorilla or even an elephant in front of a mirror, and you put ash on them, at some point they'll go like this, either with their paw or with the trunk. So it lets us know that they know that's them in the image. But to make a leap from that to how they think of themselves, do they have a sense of separate identity? We don't know.
We don't know.
We know, right? And we know that it's both a blessing and an incredible leap in evolution to have a sense of self, and it's also the source of all our suffering, because now we can have a sense of loneliness and alienation and abandonment, mortality awareness. That's kind of the price we pay for that self-awareness.
So that awareness, yeah, that idea of the separation too, which is kind of like what segues into what you said in Conscious Love, that you talk about transforming our relationship to relationships, right? Can you explain that? Because that's a beautiful line. Our relationship to relationships. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I love that too, because it really is about that, about how do we approach relationships. Because if we're approaching a relationship thinking or with the hope that it's going to make us happy, that you are going to make me happy, you are going to give me a sense of wholeness and fulfillment, forget it, right? There isn't anybody out there who's going to make us happy. And it's not their job to. Like, how unfair to put that on somebody else, or even add that weight of responsibility to a relationship to make us happy. So not a good strategy, not going to happen. So that's what, to me, approaching a relationship consciously means. Knowing that only we are going to make ourselves happy, that we are the only ones responsible for that. And then the relationship adds a lot of value to life, right? To do them consciously means that, especially when both partners are in on this, that we use the container of the relationship to speed up our process of growth and healing and evolution. Because the truth is, we all have blind spots that we're never going to see in ourselves. That's part of what the ego mind does, right? It blocks certain aspects of ourselves to ourselves. But boy, can we spot those in the partner, right? In the other. So to approach relationship consciously means that it's a safe bet, that if it's there, it's here. And the more whatever they do gets us, triggers us, the clearer the sign that it's also here, that we're also doing that in some way. And it could be different. The details could be completely different. Could be, it's not going to look the same way. So here's an example. Years ago, I was dating somebody who suddenly disappeared, stopped showing up for no emails, no phone calls.
Ghosted.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And I didn't get it, right? I was focused, what's going on with them? Called at work, wasn't working there. What's going on? Is he fired? Is it drugs? Didn't get it, right? I was focused there. So created subconsciously, of course, another situation. Was working with an agent, a literary agent in New York, who was great about communications. Suddenly, a week goes by and I haven't heard from her. All right. Now, two people, different walks of life, that got my attention. And so what are they doing, right? Because it's a blind spot. What are they doing first? Look at it outside first. They're not showing up. They're not doing what they said they were going to do. They're not keeping their word. They're not keeping their agreement, etc. Right? Easy to see, harder to see here. It's like, yeah, okay, how am I doing that? It took me a few days to see it because I was looking at my relationships. No, I'm showing up. No, I'm keeping my agreements. No, I'm doing what I said I was going to do. And then it hit me like 3 days afterwards in relationship to my writing. How many times had I said to myself, nobody else was in on this, I'm going to finish that chapter by such and such a day. Did I do it? No. Did I renegotiate the deadline? No. I was busy. I was doing retreats. I was doing workshops, all good stuff, but I wasn't showing up for my writing. I wasn't keeping my word to myself in that particular area of life. So same thing, right? Different details, same crap. And so, but here's the good news about that. Once we become conscious of it, once we become aware of the patterns and why we do the things we do, we stop creating drama. Like suddenly, once I had that awareness, they both showed up. They both called.
No, so what would you say to someone that is unconsciously not recognizing those patterns? There's the connection between the consciousness and the body. So how would you suggest for somebody that is unconscious to start recognizing the patterns within themselves?
Well, it's the $1 million question, right? Because they're not even aware of what they're doing or not doing. Start looking within, right? Start noticing the patterns, like what kind of arguments, what kind of relational situations keep showing up in your life, what type of relationships keep showing up. Sometimes it feels like it's the same old boring movie, only with a different actor, with a different co-lead. So the problem is that most of us focus on the co-actor, on the co-lead. We focus externally. At some point, we have to get honest and look at ourselves and say there's one common denominator in every single one of those arguments, in every single one of those relationships, and it's right here. What's going on? Why do I keep creating these patterns? Why do I keep attracting subconsciously this type of person? And that's the beginning of the journey, right? It all begins with self-awareness.
So let's talk about love. You alluded to it earlier. Let's talk about love. And it's such a, we could do, this is a complicated subject, but you mentioned, it's a nice segue because it correlates to what you just mentioned, right? You start looking at the stuff, but you mentioned that love is a path of personal and spiritual growth. Talk about that.
Yeah, we have a limited way of looking at love. We focus on love and the feeling of love. And yet that doesn't always work, right? Because think about disciplining a child. Like, you can't have sugar, or child's about to run out into the middle of a busy street. No, right? You grab the kid and pull the kid back. It's an act of love, and that doesn't feel good. Like saying no to a kid doesn't feel good, but it's an act of love. And so this is kind of paraphrasing and inspired by the work of Scott Peck in The Road Less Traveled, where he talks about how love is not a feeling, but love is an act. And the way that he defines it is actually really interesting. He says that love is when we place ourselves outside of our comfort zone, right? So when we have to do something that's not comfortable to us, when we have to place ourselves in some degree of risk, and that means emotional, psychological risk, for the sake of the spiritual growth of another person. That's deep, right? So another way to look at it is like the honeymoon, right? Where that initial 3 months or maybe 6 months, maybe 9 if you haven't moved in together yet, in that honeymoon phase, that other person can do no wrong. We see them through rose-colored glasses. Until, right, they move in together and they do the toilet paper the wrong way, and everybody knows that this is the right way, facing right, or they squeeze the toothpaste from the wrong end, and then that's it. Ego boundaries come back up. Now we feel separate, and that's the point where many of us is like, where did the love go? Right, and then we leave that relationship in search of greener pastures. And Scott Peck says that that's when the work of real loving begins, at the end of the honeymoon. Once that illusion, that illusionary phase ends, that's when the work of real relationship begins.
In our previous question about looking at ourselves consciously when we are unconscious, how do we, and we're beginning to see these patterns, right? The result of doing that, looking at that, it's guilt, regret, this sense of failure and powerlessness. How do you suggest a person that's going through that transition, looking, really wanting to make that work, using love as a way to walk that path and walk that transition?
Yeah, when we embark on that hero's journey, and we abandon the safety of the known, it's messy. Right in the beginning, it's messy. Sure, we meet some allies on the journey and some adversaries, some challenges along the way. And those are some of the companions, right? All those emotions and feelings and states of being are part of those companions on that journey, on that heroic journey, allies or adversaries. If we maintain that sense of self, which we can call love, that sense of honoring who we are, respecting who we are, no matter what, whether we're in an up or a down or a challenge or a great part of the relationship, that sense of self-worth, which takes a while to get to, that's what gets us through, right? That call it maybe an intuition or a sense of knowing that even when dark times, all we got to do is take another step, take another breath, just keep going. I love the image of one of those Indiana Jones movies. I think must be the one about the Holy Grail, where he's standing on this kind of the great chasm, this cliffside, on the other side of which are the graves, the Holy Grail. And it's not until he figures out that he has to step into the void, right? In that leap of trust, that step of trust. Once he does that, the bridge, the stone shows up to meet his foot. And that's kind of part of that journey that we're talking about too.
Yeah.
That it's that sense of knowing, that trust that when we step into the void, even when we have no idea what's going to happen, that stone will meet us.
There, right? And I mean, it's so beautiful that you mentioned that. You are the second person that I've interacted with in the last few months that mentioned that same scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, taking that leap of faith. And that's what is required, that leap of faith, to trust, to know that your inner guidance is going to be there. And that's a beautiful thing. Can you give us an example in your life in which that inner guidance actually led you once you trusted it and allowed it to flow through you?
Oh my God, so many times. When I went off on my spiritual journey, I quit my job, sold my condo, sold my car, gave away most of my belongings, held on to my books and my Armani suits, which lets you know a little bit about my attachment, even though I never wear suits anymore. And the hardest part was the family, because like we were talking about earlier, so we really are close knit. And I was leaving Miami, where I lived at the time. I was moving to Hawaii as part of a small spiritual community. I didn't know when I would be able to come back and see them again. And yet I knew somewhere deep inside me, I knew that for my spiritual growth, that's what I needed to do. And it was the most difficult thing I've ever done, those 5 years in that spiritual community. And I am who I am because of that. And the level of trust that has happened in me is priceless. Priceless. Like there was even a time where my spiritual teacher at the time, and I, long story, but she disbanded the group except for me. And so it was just me and her for about six months. And it was rough in it. Like one time it got us bad because we got as bad that we ended up living in the car for about a week. We were homeless for about a week. And at a time where, so I felt responsible for her, for the teachings, because she was experiencing some kind of transformation, that she was half here, half not, somewhere else, not very functional in this third dimensional reality. And yet, so I'm freaking out. And yet we never missed a meal, not once. Like we'd be down to like $3-4, and out of somewhere unexpected source, money would show up. And that happened multiple times. And so I got to learn trust at the cellular level. So it was a difficult and yet very worthwhile journey.
That's a beautiful story right there. That's because you have to, you have to take that leap of faith. And I know that we live in a cynical society that would say, well, that's irresponsible and so forth and so on. But the idea that you are here as a consequence of that is a great testament of your spirit, you know? And what do you say to that? That, you know, because there's a lot of people in our society that will be cynical looking at something like that as taking that leap of faith, which I relate to. What would
Yeah.
you say to that?
It's like, I get it. I totally understand it, but that's looking at the world through a filter of what societal expectations are about the way that we need to do things, what we need to do with life, and it's a filter. And I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of having been quote unquote different, is that you're forced to. I think it's a really good thing for all of us to do. Some of us had to face those difficult questions earlier. It's like, wait a minute, am I going to live my life, my very short life on this planet, based on what somebody else thinks I should be or do, or decide for me what's right and what's wrong? Am I going to go by teachings that were written thousands of years ago? That, back at a time, for the record, that women weren't even human, so to speak, that were property. And teachings that have been translated and retranslated and mistranslated, taken out of their cultural and historical context. If you do, I mean, that's knock yourself out. But I'm not gonna go by that. I'm gonna and yeah, it's harder, right? It's harder to decide for yourself what's right and what's wrong. And I write about that, about developing our own morality, and navigating right and wrong. And I live by few rules, but one of those rules is do no harm.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that rule is consistent amongst all the mythologies and all the great teachers that
Yes.
arrive at the conclusions that you have. Is I could have what I want, and as long as I don't violate the rights of others, and as
Exactly.
long as I don't hurt anybody. So that's a beautiful conclusion. Again, I'm loving this conversation because you are an embodiment of it. And it's not what you hear a lot in our society in terms of really living it and really feeling it and really being confident in speaking about it. So thank you for that. Now, in your previous book, you talked a lot about power. And power is one of those words and one of those concepts like love that are often misunderstood, right? So in our current world where everyone is so focused on controlling and fear and all those type of things, how does a person develop their own individual power, right, without that point of view of with the point of view of not hurting people around that?
Yeah.
How does a
Beautiful.
person develop that power to really make a positive impact? And one of the words that you used earlier was to evolve. How does a person develop that and use that?
Beautiful, beautiful question. I think two things to say about that. One of them is going back to the heroic journey, the hero's journey that you and I have been talking about, right? Which requires going within and asking ourselves, getting clear about, what we like, what we don't like, what works for us, what doesn't, what are our preferences, what are our dreams, um, and getting clear about what are the patterns, what are the triggers, in which type of situations do I tend to give my power away? Is it in romantic relationships with authority figures, parental figures, bosses? When do I say yes when inside it's really no? It's really not okay. But in order to keep the peace, to maintain a semblance of acceptance or pseudo love, we override our deepest feelings, our deepest dreams, and we settle. We end up settling. Um, so that's part of the journey. The other part of it is understanding a little bit more about power, because we all struggle with issues around power. And no wonder, right? We've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing. Like, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what good person wants to be corrupted? But what they didn't tell us about that is that Lord Acton, who said those words, was speaking specifically about political power, not the personal power that you and I are
Mm,
talking about.
yep, correct.
So combine that, all that conditioning, with the countless abuses of power that we have all witnessed, whether in our personal lives or professionally or just out in the world watching the news. We develop this really negative feeling about power. And so we end up like rejecting it, throwing the baby out with the baptismal water, so to speak. And so part of what it's a good process to do, difficult, yes, but figure out like what is our relationship to power, and realizing that there's a different type of power, that I call soulful power, call it spiritual power, which is different than the way the world relates to power, which is like you were talking about, hierarchical, my way or the highway, uh, that requires that I push you down, step on you, put my knee to your neck in order to feel powerful. Well, that's just one type of power. That's worldly power or egoic power. There's the different kind of power that comes from within, that is power with, not power over. It doesn't require that we push anybody down or take anything from them. And it's just as powerful, if not more.
Yeah.
So think of a Gandhi or a Gandalf, if you like the Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
In their simple monastic robes, their sandal feet, you would never know from looking at them how much power they hold until it's necessary, and then get out of the way.
Yes.
Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point in terms of global reach and influence, and he did that without ever shooting a gun or landing a single punch. That's power. And that's the kind of power that's inside each of us that we all have access to. Nobody can give it to us. Nobody can take it away. We are the only ones who give it away for those sad reasons that we do. Understandable, but unnecessary.
Yeah. And to that point of power and understanding and within us, one of the things that we talked about is leadership itself, leadership. How does a person in the here and now, because we live in the here and now and we have to create in the here and now, balances that polarity of love and power in the way that they live their lives, their families, and whatever functions they perform in society? How would you advise a person to balance that polarity of power and love to actually help evolve the collective?
Mm. Yeah, well, I think you and Jesse read about that. Inspire leadership, conscious leadership. Leading by example rather than by telling you what to do. To me, that's what inspires real change in the world. By living authentically, which requires that we do the work of figuring out who we are so that we can be that authentically. There's no way around that work for me if we want to be happy and fulfilled, and if we want to step and live our purpose. I think by far anybody who stayed this long in this conversation knows that there isn't anybody who's going to make us happy out there, and that no amount of money, no amount of worldly success, no amount of possessions, it's ever going to be enough. It's never going to make us happy. To me, the only thing that's going to make us happy is to express that unique human potential, whatever that is, and to express it as fully and authentically as possible. In one case, it might be writing an Oscar-winning screenplay. Somebody else's might be making the best damn chocolate brownies this side of the Mississippi. It doesn't matter what we give expression to. What matters is that we do it. Because there isn't anybody out there in this universe or any other universe that has the same genetics, the same experiences, the same personality qualities that make each one of us unique. If we don't give expression to that, ain't nobody else going to do it.
Yep, absolutely. Your work, in addition to being personal development, it's also cultural and global. And in the words that you just mentioned, in the writings that you do, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing right now to continue the mission that you started. And how do people get in touch with you? How do people get to work with you? How does all that happen?
Yeah, well, in terms of how to reach me, the books are available on Amazon, or they can order from their local bookstore if they want to support them, which I would recommend. As somebody who loves books, in terms of reaching me, probably my website is the best, soulfulpower.com, SOULFUL power, POWER.com. And from there, they can either reach out to me or access my social media. In terms of how I work with people, I do one-on-one coaching. I do retreats. I have a virtual year-long transformational coaching program. It's called Adventures in Transformation. So, we do that online. We meet every other week. And we go through all these different themes that we've been talking about. Like first quarter is understanding the ego, understanding ourselves, why we do the things we do, how we sabotage ourselves, why we get defensive, why we take things personally, all that stuff. The control freak aspect of the ego mind that we all have a part of. Then the second quarter is stepping into power, consciously, intentionally. Power with, not power over. How do we do that? And part of the beauty of the process is that we're going through life, right? And stuff is going to come up, whether arguments at home or conflict, power struggles at work. We apply the teachings in real time. Third quarter, relationships. Like, how do we do relationships consciously in a way that not only we get to meet those great needs of companionship and intimacy and sex and family and all that good stuff. Then what, right? How do we use that container of the relationship to speed up our process of healing and transformation and evolution? And then the last quarter is purpose, right? Like, all right, we work through all that stuff. Then what? What are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do with all that, and how are we going to make a difference in this world?
Christian, it's been such a pleasure to see a fellow traveler in the road of life, in the road less traveled.
Yes.
I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking your time and sharing so much. Your soul radiates, I could tell, and the work that you're doing to help humanity evolve and to help individuals see the beauty within them. To share in the here and now, to create in the here and now, is an example that I would love to emulate. So thank you so much. Any final words that you would like to leave the audience with?
Well, thank you, Omar. Gracias, hermano.
Gracias. Placer.
It's a pleasure knowing you. Pleasure knowing you're also out there doing the heroic journey.
Thank you.
It takes one to know one. And appreciate you. I appreciate the work that you're doing and the difference that you're making, and even your willingness of having a show at this depth and asking this kind of question. Thank you, because many lives and many souls are being touched and impacted, and we're all in this together.
Thank you for joining us, and a big thanks to Christian for sharing such soul-stirring insights. To explore his books and join his community, visit soulfulpower.com. Until next time, find meaning, navigate change, and live and lead fully.